Hey, good afternoon, good evening for those of you who are watching live and from some place where it's evening. Otherwise, if you're watching this later, thanks for checking it out. If you haven't met me before, my name is Dr. Andrew Hill. I am the founder of Peak Brain Institute, which offers neurofeedback and brain mapping all around the world. Thanks, guys, for showing up live. Those of you who are wandering in, I see Radar. I just turned on the audio. Thanks for catching me. Thank you for the confirmation. Appreciate that. I'll clip out those first 20 seconds in a day or two. And good to have people backing me up. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the impact of ADHD, the correlation at least with ADHD and the increased risk for dementia, which is something that's been known for a while, but the reasons for it remain unclear. And there's a couple of very recent studies that are suggesting some of the mechanisms that are involved here. So I wanted to talk about some of the brainwaves involved and some of the different studies. And as always, this is Neurofeedback and Chill. So I'm going to set myself up for some neurofeedback. And for reasons that will become clear as we get more into the topic, I'm going to do HEG tonight, biofeedback on blood flow. So neurofeedback means biofeedback on the central nervous system, and most forms of neurofeedback are on some aspects of the electricity, the EEG, which is the brain waves, or the slow cortical shifts in electricity called the slow cortical potential, or the DC shift. There's deep oscillations that are infralow, infraslow, below 1 hertz that are things that the sort of brainstem rides on. So we have these electricity patterns in the brain. And usually when we say neurofeedback, that's what we mean. But we can also train the blood flow or the perfusion dynamics is the actual term here. So let me set myself up. I have my HEG on the screen. Let me turn off the title here. So, hey, Radar Ashwood. Hey, Joe Barr. Nice to see you guys tonight, or wherever it happens to be for you. Feel free to ask questions. Anyone who's watching, I see a handful of you guys lurking. Say hi if you feel so called. Ask questions if you want. So tonight I'm going to train my brain using a pocket neurobics device. I've got this thing plugged in, which is a Pocket Neurobics UWIZ, their current model. I think this is the only one that they make now. But it's a nice little 4-channel EEG amp, and it has a secret little hidden socket for HEG on the butt. And what HEG is hemoencephalography, i.e. blood or iron heme. And this HEG device is an infrared sensor. There's a couple different flavors of HEG in the field. This one's a passive sensor. It's simply little germanium? No, not the flower, germanium chips that are not focused, and so they'll get infrared heat coming off my brain. And there's another form of HEG called near infrared. This is called passive infrared. And the PIR version I like a lot better for things like blood flow and migraines and metabolic issues like concussions and brain fog after COVID. So I'm taking the device and I'm plugging in the headset. Actually, before I do that, let me put it on first, because the software that I'm using should auto-calibrate the headset once I plug it into the amplifier. It'll put itself in the right mode automatically. And if it's sitting on my head, then it will, let's see, is that roughly level? Close enough. All right, so now that it's on my head, if I plug it in, it will auto-calibrate. So I'm just going to plug this in right here. And you can see the upper, there it is. So in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, the CH1 is now flashing blue up here. And that means the amp is in HEG calibrate mode. But you can also see, I bet, yeah, the driver window for the amp is back here. So you see it says HEG calibrate, that green. That'll go away in a second. Once it finishes calibrating, there it goes. And now the amplifier is in HEG mode. So let's go back to the software. And I have a very simple way of doing HEG training where I don't threshold it. I don't actually use conditional or parameterized rewards that are only happening on certain types of change. Instead, I use some dynamic information about the heat signal as the training information itself. So it's a continuous signal. And you'll see once I hit play. So there's some audio happening and a pink line. I'm guessing you guys can hear that audio. Let me know if you can hear little chimes and dings in the background. I'll turn it up if you can't hear it. So what I'm doing for this biofeedback session is I'm looking at the heat coming off my brain, and that's the pink line and the audio and the ball. And when my perfusion goes up, the pink line goes up. When the perfusion goes down or the heat goes down, pink line goes down. But I should be able to, unlike most forms of EEG, in HEG, it responds to voluntary control a little bit. So concentration, happy thoughts, thinking really strong, like that, is a big surge of blood, a big surge of energy and heat into my brain. Look at that. I'm pleased with myself clearly, so it happened again. So these are surges of metabolism. You're creating dynamic range. Important to know if you're training your brain with HEG that the surge of heat you're seeing happens about 2 seconds after the exertion or the happy thought. There's something called a BOLD response, a blood oxygen level dependent response, which is what's used in MRI, fMRI, to see the metabolic loading. Ooh, I'm just cooking tonight, literally. So, or figuratively, I guess. So the blood flow responds more slowly than the neurons do, essentially. So thinking or focusing is really quick, and then the blood flow responds with a bit of a lag. So it's the blood flow dynamics that are lagged, not the software in this case. All right, let's get some questions here. Hey, Radar, you saw there was some research about elevated 4 to 12 hertz in people with essential tremor at the cerebellum. Could that be addressed by training at the Inian Ridge? I'm a skeptic when it comes to cerebellar EEG. I know there are people claiming they're getting EEG off the cerebellum. The dipoles that produce EEG are pointed wrong to measure without indwelling electrodes. So I think that cerebellar EEG is one of those aspects of our field that, you know, it's blind men and elephants. We're getting signals, but it's not from the cerebellum. It's probably from the posterior and inferior temporal lobes and parietal lobes that we're getting it, where there's actual EEG, maybe occipital, there's actual EEG. No app sound. Let me turn up the app sound here. All right. Thanks, El Chatterino. I just turned up the volume. You getting dings now? Little bells and dings? Let me know. So I'm not sure what I think, Radar, about that flavor, that thalfa, that 4 to 12 range. I think it's excessive, but you're not probably getting it from the cerebellum, is my thought. And training it could probably be impactful, but I would have to assume that it's something to do with the temporal areas. And, you know, I might want to do more sophisticated training with an essential tremor, looking at DTI tracks or looking at a 4-channel multivariate coherence approach with multivariant QEEG to drive that. You know, I'm not sure is a short answer. You hearing the sound now? Yeah, I turned it up way, so I'll turn it down in a second again. So Radar Ashwood, the short answer is I don't know. Except that I would say, while I'm not a huge fan of training at the Inian Ridge for those kinds of physiological phenomena, more for trauma type things. Let me get a big surge here. Another surge. Let's do a big surge of heat. Big surge of heat. Happy thoughts. Oh, I'm tired. There it goes. See, 2 seconds later. And again and again and again. Come on, come on, come on. All right, I get distracted by my HEG training. There it goes. So, I also think there's lots of things we do in our field that work, and we don't always know why. And among those are body-based phenomena. So I'm reminded of Jacqueline Ginsberg. I forgot her last name. She's one of a pair of people who invented a technique called beta reset. And that's when you sweep down the back of the head using essentially 4 wires. You know, you're doing 2 channels, and you're above and below the inion ridge. So let's call it, I forget what the coordinate system would be, something like OI or something. So you're kind of low, you're kind of bracketing the inion ridge, you know, below it and above it on both sides, about where the P or the O sites would be, the first sites. And then you sweep down and then back up through a range of beta rewards, doing about 90 seconds each. And that creates this decoherence phenomena that seems to really create body-based changes in people. So if I was trying to go after essential tremor, something like the beta reset protocol might be a target. I would also look at maybe some coherence protocols, or some 2-channel or some protocols for the phase relationship work. I don't know. It depends. It depends on what we saw beyond the essential tremor in the person's brain. So I wanted to talk tonight a little bit about, again, ADHD and the increased risk for dementia. My 7-minute session here is almost done of the HEG, so I might let it run through and then pull up an article and chat about some things and show you a couple of things. So for those of you who are not super familiar with the way we think about ADHD in the brain as neuroscientists and as neurofeedbackers, well, that was a big surge. I started to concentrate and got a big blood flow surge, apparently. We think about the ADHD phenomena as largely being related to beta wave production on the left and right sides of the brain, right in the middle, where the left drives up the initiation of behavior, and the right is involved with the supervision of behavior. The right precentral gyrus especially is really indicated with many flavors of ADHD and many ADHD-like phenomena. So you can think of the right precentral area, about here on me, as being a supervisor of executive function. It knows if you're paying attention. Here we go, finish this. Nice thing about HEG is there's no goop and no gel to clean up, so I'm done, and that's it. The executive function system with its left and right contributors uses beta waves to do its job. And in ADHD, you'll see a lot of theta being another feature that tends to show up. And that theta is really classic with regards to ADHD. It's not there in every flavor of ADHD, but it's often there. Even when you have inattentive, which is more of an alpha phenomena, if you will, you'll still have an awful lot of theta for most people. So let me pull up an article here. I think I have one on the screen. Yes, I do. Oops. The left and right sides of the brain are heavily involved, but the right is really this. Sorry, I'm having trouble getting my browser to come up properly. Let's see. Let's do this. There it is. Oh, I had minimized it. Silly me. All right, so here we have an EEG, a QEEG, and you can see that this is somebody looking at their brain with and without Concerta, with and without Ritalin. And we're looking at the amount of so we're looking at a bell curve, and as things are green, they are average or typical. And as things are outside of that, as they go blue or red, they become unusual. And red is a larger amount of brainwave features than the average person your age, and the blue is a lower amount. And here, this person has a lot of theta. Most of the head is dominated by theta there in the top. And that is the baseline brain. They also have a lot of front midline beta as well, as you can see. That's the anterior cingulate being in high gear, and that's generally a perseverative and obsessive kind of mode. The switcher of attention's up front. But the control over executive functions largely a theta versus beta versus alpha kind of phenomena that runs ear to ear. And you can see in this person's top map, they had lots and lots of theta. This is their baseline QEEG. Lots and lots and lots of theta. And then this is their brain a few days later with much, much less theta showing. And that is a function, if you will, of the Concerta, of the Ritalin. So it suppressed their theta really, really well. So there's research. I've written an article for you tonight, and you can dig into the article and learn more about it. But there's several things jumping out about dementia recently that also have to do with theta. So we think about theta as a disinhibition, as a taking the brakes off in ADHD. And we think of alpha as having a kind of a driftiness in ADD, which is more left-sided. You can see this person also had that. The alpha is inattentive, the theta is impulsive, the beta is anxious. And then over here on the left, just to complete the picture, this is the blue and purple and red bars, or the gas pedal, turning things on, grabbing information. And the right-hand side over here is pumping the brakes and becoming impulsive or not. So when the bars are nice and tall, things are good. And she was missing a bar right there. In fact, vigilance was not there. And this is just, again, Concerta. And so you can see what a strong change, an instant change pretty much, that was made by the methylphenidate in terms of supporting this person's executive function. So, this is interesting stuff. There's been a lot of research around for a long time that there's some increased incidence in dementia with ADHD. And let me see if I go back to the top of the page here, get some statistics for you, because there's been some pretty big studies. So one study, this is the most recent one that came out March 25th, I want to talk about, which is really about a phenomena in ADHD brains that I'll get to that is maybe giving us a hint about why we are more at risk for dementia. But before we get there, there do seem to be some overlaps with this phenomena. So there was a study that Levine looked at, published in 2023, looking at over 109,000 participants across 17 years. And they found an elevated risk factor of 2.77 times greater risk in an ADHD population. Huge effect size, huge increased risk. And this wasn't just people, I'm showing you here, it wasn't just people who had ADHD themselves. The genetic component was established in Sweden at Karolinska. What's the size? Over 2 million participants were followed over 20 years, and all of their family members, cousins, grandparents, kids, etc. So it was a huge group of people, and they found that the relatives of those that were diagnosed as ADHD also had an increased risk for dementia. So there seems to be a genetic component of ADHD that is making people more predisposed to the dementia phenomena. And there's some shared phenomena that's underlying the two. We didn't really know what it was. Here's a little interesting tidbit. The effects of ADHD treatment using stimulants to treat ADHD may reduce the risk of developing dementia from that long study by Levine. Pretty amazing. So we've for years in the ADHD landscape thought that stimulants were more symptom masking, behavior controlling, but didn't really change the person's ability to use their brain in college or to develop habits. Well, this would actually suggest there are cumulative positive effects that might show up from the stimulants. So let's keep looking at similarities. I showed you this slide on the theta, and the theta-beta ratio is sort of the thing we look at in ADHD. Now, not the ratio itself. That has kind of a weak predictive validity. It's better to look at the actual theta and alpha presence, how it's related to other features. This person, because she has a lot of beta, wouldn't have a high theta-beta ratio, and yet stimulants work great, very impulsive or inattentive without them. You can see the theta, see the alpha. So it's clearly an ADHD type phenomena, even though this person also had classic anxiety phenomena as well that would mask the lack of beta and throw off something like a theta-beta ratio. So Monaster's work there early on found theta as the big signature, the big culprit. And we also see in dementia that people's brainwaves slow down. With tissue loss and aging, you have slower brainwaves. The amplitude dips and the speed also dips. And there's some evidence that alpha may slow down into a theta range as well. And theta is a reduced alpha as well. Theta has a very reduced perfusion or reduced blood flow. It's kind of a sleepy metabolic state. Lifting your foot off the brakes allows the tissue to act, but it doesn't take a lot of energy. It's more of an automatic, reflexive action of that part of the brain. So let's see. Leslie Pritchett, Leslie Sherlin rather, John Pritchett did a study that showed that you can see similar patterns in symptomatic Alzheimer's as ADHD, i.e. the theta beta ratio. So let me show you this. This is the NYU Brain Research Center. And they followed, this is the, at NYU Brain Research Memory Center, it's a place to walk into, sorry, let me get back to the right part. It's a place to walk into if you're noticing you're having memory trouble. And what they did was they measured people's executive function. They also did QEEGs. This is an old school database. I think it's Brain DX or something. I forget which one it is, but it's an old school QEEG database. The scale colors are different, but they mean the same thing, where in this case, black is typical. And as you go up towards brighter colors, it's a larger amount of that phenomena, and blue is a lower amount. And so they tracked 44 people walking in with complaints of memory issues. And they tracked them for 7 to 9 years. So not that long. But they were able to distinguish at the end of that time, retrospectively, decliners in memory from those that did not decline, i.e., are your memory problems actually an issue? Are you going to develop cognitive impairment and dementia, or are you not? And you can see that they grouped the participants by the decliners and the non-decliners here in the study. And the non-decliners, you can see it's a fairly dark set, middle of the bell curve brain resources. Yes, there's some increased theta, some frontal stuff. Oh, this column is theta. I've clipped it. I'm not going to move the page. I don't think it'll let me move it without. Let's see. Yeah, sorry, I've blown the page up too much to risk moving. I'm just going to, just trust me, this second column is theta. And you can see in the decliners, in those who had a memory phenomena show up over time, they have large amounts of theta. I mean, very large amounts, coming up here in a multiple standard deviation as you get up toward the front of the head. That's where it's actually most intense. If you're used to looking at old school, NeuroGuide brain maps and not this old school, it's a little confusing because usually dark red is the worst and dark blue is the worst. But in this case, those are slightly off. And then the lighter colors, white, if you will, or light beige here is the worst. So tons of theta showing up, predicting who was going to progress. And when the study came out, this is before the studies that came out showing that there was this increased incidence of dementia in ADHD. The Levine study shows it's 2.77 times, almost 3 times greater incidence in the neuroatypical, if you will, ADHD population compared to typical. That's a pretty large statistic. But when I used to teach this slide in an aging brain class, 15 years ago, kids with ADHD be like, hey, does that mean I'm going to get it sooner? And I didn't think that was the case. I thought we were seeing similar mechanisms of executive function not compensating well. It's not a progressive. You don't become dementia if you have ADHD, but we're seeing similar ways that executive can get dysregulated, impaired, and be thrown off. Now I'm not so sure, especially after the most recent study. But before we move to that, look at the statistics here. The effect size or the association is 0.93, and the decliners differing from non-decliners, even with a small n, even with a short longitudinal, 4 sigma in a small group. So very, very powerful statistics. All right, so here is this new study that came out of Geneva looking at people with ADHD and looking at proteins in the blood that seem to be related to neuronal stress and iron deposits throughout the brain. And higher levels of iron in certain regions in both ADHD and in Alzheimer's. Now, this Alzheimer's is more broad, but some of the areas that are showing up in Alzheimer's also show up in ADHD. And one of those big areas is the precentral gyrus, especially the one on the right. So they did a large-ish study here. Do I have the number on the screen? Let's see. I don't want to read a screen on a YouTube video, so I'll just keep moving. It was a fairly large study. So I'm seeing the size. Here's the actual output. It's not that easy to see. What this is plotting where in the brain the susceptibility would be predicted based on the iron concentrations they observed, essentially. And you can see the darkest spots. A is a non-risky brain, and B has these increased darker areas. And that's increased iron. It's not the most obvious, but there's little spots there. There's ones over here. So, it's an increased iron, essentially. Healthy control on the left, and a subject who's 26 years old on the right. The iron-rich deep gray matter substructures. So the caudate, the precuneus, the caudal anterior cingulate in ADHD. And a related study that the same group did about a month or two before showed the right precentral gyrus was also heavily involved in terms of the change in theta. And these studies are all pointing at increased iron accumulation with that theta in both ADHD and in dementia. So it looks like we may have a causal mechanism or a progressive mechanism where ADHD may predispose somebody to be more vulnerable to the things that drive dementias. And we've thought of blood sugar as driving dementia. Maybe ADHD may eat more sugar, so that's valid. But there seems to be something about the actual mechanism, the enhanced amount of theta seems to change perfusion. And that perfusion may change how iron deposits get cleaned out. And not clearing your iron may be one of the mechanisms that makes us more susceptible to further neuronal damage and further tissue stress. And, we see iron throughout the brain in Alzheimer's. We also see it, iron accumulation, as one of the primary mechanisms that seems to accelerate Lewy bodies in Lewy body dementia. You see iron accumulation, and you see tissue glycation or oxidation through sugar, so literally rusting the brain. So we see these things in more advanced dementias, but now we're starting to get a sense that excess theta, super high theta, seems to be a factor here. And I've sprinkled other details throughout this paper. I'll go through and read them all one by one, but there seems to be variability as well. Like the more severe versions of ADHD seem to have more risk. And so there seems to be something to this theta not being your friend. So I didn't show you a pre-post study here. I have lots of them on other slides. Oh, this is a fun one. This is Jeff Carman's work looking at HEG. So you can see some athletes, and the befores are on top and the afters on the bottom. And you can actually see a color change in, this is the same, this is the same person. Wait, there's just one subject here, before, after, treatment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, this is the same person, sorry. This is before and after for one person. So what you're seeing is, in the upper left is before at the baseline, and then you can see in the upper right, this is before their 5th session of HEG, and there's more heat at baseline. So this is the HEG effect. So what I just did tonight is there to create a more sustained perfusion, essentially. You can so see it in both as he goes. There's more red, more orange there on the right. So again, I mentioned some large scale studies, especially by Levine. And this is interesting too. The increased risk was not observed among elders who were using psychostimulants, suggesting ADHD might mitigate the risk in terms of treatment. Now, I don't think you need stimulants necessarily. I mean, maybe there's something to do with the vascular pumping, but I think it's probably more about the theta. And I would argue that addressing the theta through meditation, through neurofeedback of the EEG, through neurofeedback on HEG, through psychostimulants, there's lots of ways. These may be really, really important things to manage as we get later in life. Just like you don't want to go into diabetes because that'll drive your Alzheimer's risk way, way up. We may want to get control over ADHD before we go past those magical years where anti-aging, if you will, is a lot harder, which is around the mid-50s or so. So as one more fact here, I wanted to, the effect of ADHD on dementia risk remains significant even after controlling for other Alzheimer's factors like cardiovascular. I think they also control for diabetes. So there's a big phenomena here in the literature. So again, it's a predisposition, it seems like. This is Levine's idea. It's not so much a causal thing, but it makes us more vulnerable to the progression of things that are in the dementia landscape. And there's like a phenomenon of executive function dysregulation early on that may be a real thing. I was talking to somebody today, and I've mentioned this once or twice recently. I have a large amount of people in my client populations who are women who've gotten their first ADHD diagnosis in their mid-years, 40s and 50s, because they hit menopause, sleep gets a little dysregulated, and we see that there is this big dip in executive function. And so suddenly it all jumps out, and the subacute ADHD, if you will, gets turned up to 11. We have a really big phenomenon. And people come in all the time saying, hey, my doctor said I have ADHD. I'm like 45. Well, what? And yeah, you can kind of see it in the brain maps, but it's usually on top of other phenomena like sleep dysregulation driving it up, quite a lot. All right, so I've been lagging on my questions here. Radar is asking, is anyone in neurofeedback doing anything with machine learning to my knowledge? Yes, I am a little bit. I'm planning on doing a lot more this summer. I'm working on a couple of app projects I have to get out the door, and then I'm going to do some work with machine learning. There are people doing some work with it. I don't think anyone's doing it well yet. But I think that's probably coming, broadly. Okay, let's see. Radar's asking, what does Lamictal do to the EEG? I forget what it does to the actual EEG. I think it changes beta. I think it causes more slow brain waves, and I think it might affect the amplitude of beta. You can look it up really easily. Just go to PubMed and search on EEG and Lamictal. There are papers on that exact drug. The important thing is, those drugs are long acting, so it's not just that you non-iron containing tissues. It's very, very toxic. Oh, I might have blipped there. My OBS studio told me it was blipping. Let's see. You like my insight regarding theta, Radar Ashwood? Thank you. I appreciate that. So yes, if you have TBIs, if you have ADHD, if you have diabetes, if you have early dementia, if you're concerned, people in your family have had a lot of ADHD or a lot of dementia, I encourage you to do something about it. Control your diet, go keto perhaps, or primal or paleo, maybe do the Apollo Health Recode or Precode program, definitely do brain mapping so you can look at your brain and see how you have these, if you have high theta features, and what will then take control of them. And maybe do neurofeedback with us. We can get you set up around the world with remote systems, and we have amazing coaches that work live 7 days a week. Well, not every coach is up 7 days a week. That'd be cruel. But we have a great team that trades off. And there's always people around to help support your neurofeedback if you want to work with us at Peak Brain. So those are my big takeaways. We seem to have our first big implication about why ADHD is so heavily predictive or an increased risk factor for dementia. And it's not about the type 3 diabetes phenomena. It's not about the oxidative stress phenomena as directly. It's more about, we think, iron. So there you go. There's your takeaway for the night. Let's see who's still hanging out. Got a bunch of people on. Hey, guys. Been kind of nattering on here, but I appreciate your attention. Let's see. Yeah, Harry, so any other questions you guys have this fine evening? I might dig more into theta's mechanism itself, how it's produced, what it is, other ways it shows up throughout the brain next week, or I might do something else on aging. A couple topics. I'm blipping? Okay. Yeah, sorry, Radar Ashwood. My OBS told me it was disconnecting and then reconnecting. I should be okay now. But those are all the big points I wanted to make for the night, that we seem to have this new mechanism involved with not just dementia, which we've known about iron for a while, but in the ADHD link, there seems to be this iron component, iron accumulation component, that seems to be a little bit of a secret little factor in theta. So anyways, guys, thanks for your attention tonight. If you have additional questions or thoughts, please lay them on me before we break. But maybe we'll keep this one a little short tonight and give you time to go read the article if you want. Feel free. I know we often reach an hour or so. So also let me know as you guys want other types of content. I think I'm going to start spinning up podcasts again pretty soon. I have a few of those in the can to start dropping. I'm going to do some short 10-minute videos on different educational topics for you as well. If you do want to look at your brain, you can come to Peak Brain in the various cities we're in. We have offices for brain maps in Stockholm and London. We're also in New York City with a physical office, Los Angeles, Orange County, California, and St. Louis. And you can map your brain in the US also remotely. If you're coming to an office, we have a great deal. It's $250 for you once a year, and you can do multiple brain maps like the good biohackers you are and learn to take control of your brain health. And if you're remote in the US, the deal is about $1,000 for a remote brain map. It's a one-off, although you also get access to the offices as well. And then that program fee for the brain map would go into the neurofeedback program if you decided to choose one of those. So come ask me questions about brain maps and let me know if there's other things you want to know about neurofeedback. Otherwise, I might just keep educating about random topics week to week. Radar Ashwood's asking, are dry electrodes as good for QEEGs if the electrodes are active? No, they suck. They're horrible. Stay away. Well, let me tell you how I really feel. They're horrible. Stay away. Dry electrodes are horrible. They do all kinds of things to make up the difference for being dry. In the cases of dry ones that don't have high impedance cages around them, they use aggressive filtering to filter out anything that they don't think is EEG, and they do it poorly, and they break the time characteristics of the signal by doing too aggressive filtering. The big problem is most of the QEEG systems that do dry electrodes will have little Faraday cages around each electrode. And what that means is you're not measuring the same EEG. Because regular EEG, under an electrode, you're getting information from under that place, but also from everywhere else, summed and mixed. And if you're putting a bunch of Faraday cages all around the measuring sources, you're getting different phase and coherence and everything else. So it's not valid in that way. Another big problem is in our field, all the devices that exist, they have really big issues below 4 or 5 hertz. You can't get a lot of the theta you want to get. You can't see it. It's super important, as we discovered tonight. So, most of the dry systems will filter out aggressively 4.5 and below, and they're really useless for those frequencies, but those are important for folks that have brain fog, seizures, ADHD, concussions, all kinds of things. So no, stay away from dry ones. They're really expensive and they don't save you anything. Learn to wash your hair with goop or, put on the caps. It's the way to go. It really is. Radar saying, didn't I used to use dry? Yeah, I spent $25,000 on 2 of those headsets each when I opened my company. And then I did a lot of testing and returned one of them before the return window was over. And if you want to buy one, I have a $25,000 dry headset I'll sell you for cheap, for half of that or something if you want. Just let me know. 24 channel, wireless, Bluetooth, high impedance. And I got that one that I still have completely rehabbed by the factory. You have to rehab the dry ones every couple of years based on use. And this is fresh and ready to go. It's just I hate using it, so I stopped using it. Joe Barr is asking, would low iron serve as a protective measure against dementia then? Been vegetarian for years and just learned my iron is low. It might. I don't know. I think anemia might have its own issues. I think the oxygen carrying issues you might experience with anemia or low iron could actually cause their own issues. My hunch is what we're talking about is iron that is unbound or iron that is not staying in red blood cells properly, more accumulation and less cell integrity. So I don't know all the mechanisms of what's happening in the iron accumulation, but I would hazard a guess that low iron has its own risks. And I think we know what some of those are. And they mostly are to do with energy proliferation. We know the brain doesn't do well with drops in energy in terms of remaining healthy and plastic. So I think it might be more important for you, Joe Barr, to do things like photobiomodulation and saunas and ketones and maybe neurofeedback. Okay. So folks, thanks for hanging out with me another evening. If you could do me a favor and subscribe and give that video, whichever one you're nearest, a like. Find another one, give it a thumbs up. Tap that bell icon if you want to be notified when I go live or post a new video. Let me know what kinds of things you want to see. So if you want to come hang out with me outside of YouTube, you can book a free call. I have the link in the show notes. You can also come ask questions. I tend to be pretty active on the Reddit and Discords for neurofeedback as well. Oh, Radar, you can try my pain protocol for C4 alpha. That can be a tricky one. Look at your maps. Make sure you're not gonna don't reward that fast alpha if you already have lots of alpha in your EEG, or it could be it basically won't work. Also, I tend to inhibit in the high end like 15 to 30. If you're really in pain, 15 to 30 inhibits will usually shut down pain pretty well and make you feel dumb. So it's not worth doing that often unless you really need it. Most things in neurofeedback, you change the brain over time, but a pain protocol I would use as needed, generally only. You don't want to be changing the brain in that direction. That would probably make you kind of ADHD and screw with your sleep if you kept hammering on that C4 alpha. So I hope it serves some pain relief for you, though, and you get some good support. Well, folks, have a lovely evening. If you have questions on this stuff, I'm always around. Come hang out at Peak Brain on the website and ask us questions. At the peakbraininstitute.com website, you can book free calls with me. You can book a low-cost brain map. Radar is curious, what does training alpha at C3 help? I would probably never do that. Not training it up anyways. And even training it down, you got to be careful. Training it down would help you with things like inattentive ADHD, maybe sleep maintenance. But alpha tends to push back when you train it. So you got to be cautious. And generally the way to train alpha is to get other things out of its way, and then it moves up into the place that those things were. So if theta is excessive or if beta is excessive, getting those down will often bring up alpha. But I can't think of a good way, a good rationale, a recipe book where training C3 alpha up would make sense. I don't think that's generally a good thing. Just like you generally wouldn't ever want to train theta up anywhere on the C strip, because it will just do weird things. Those tissues do not need more alpha and theta generally. Can't you train 8 to 15 at C4 to hit both alpha and SMR? No, you cannot. Doesn't work that way. You might be able to train 8 to 11 and then 12 to 15, but training up alpha and up SMR, you're likely to get one of them to respond and the other one not to respond. They're two adjacent frequencies. So you're not going to be able to fine tune, decide, let me bring up both the alpha and the SMR. What's probably going to happen is you'll just bring up like 12 hertz alpha, a fast alpha, which is not generally ideal to come up right there. All right. No, that's totally fine, Radar. I appreciate all the questions. That's great. That's great. All right, guys, well, do me a favor, boost the show if you can. Come back and ask for more topics. Come back and ask more questions. I'm always here for you. And I will see you soon. Until I see you maybe next week, take care of those brains. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.